Good morning, everybody. Welcome to the OK Grognard Show. It is Friday, November 6th, 2020, 10 a.m. Central in beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Well, it's Friday, and that means it's Building Adventures Day. Got a Dyson Logos map up there. We'll talk about that in a little bit. We should probably just talk about building adventures for conventions in general. And everything seems to be virtual these days, or almost. But I think most of the advice I'm going to be giving will work with virtual conventions and physical conventions, and should also work with, game days. And if you're doing a one shot at the game store locally, these are just ways of being prepared for a certain slot period of time, 3-4 hours probably in most cases. I think most of the convention adventures tend to go 3-4 hours. I do 5 myself. Some people do longer. I think Adventures League slots tend to be 2 hours, if I'm not mistaken. Good morning, George. Jason, I think I saw Bruce was lurking around over there. I haven't seen him in a while. And I mean online or off. He's semi-local, northern Illinois, from the neck of the woods where I grew up, northeast Illinois. The the thing to remember, and I think I kind of was stressing this during GMing tips yesterday, was have fun. Please remember, this is advice I should give at the top and the bottom of almost every show. They talk about baseball. They talk about baseball as adults playing the children's game. It says whatever else you have in your head about what it's supposed to be about and how important everything is and all the rest of it. Southeast Wisconsin now. Are you in K-Town? Yeah, that's right, George. You're just over the border. Southeast. Racine, Pleasant Prairie, nice. My nephew got married in Pleasant Prairie. And they just had a little boy less than a month ago. So they've been married for 2 years, a little over. Anyway, try to remember, have fun, enjoy yourself. You're playing a game. Don't take it too seriously. If something is not working quite the way you expected it to, observe. Don't get frustrated. Don't get inside your own head. Take a step back. Keep running the game, but look at it. Look at it more objectively. Hey, how did that happen? Well, that's interesting. I didn't know. I did not expect that. So now I'm seeing something new. Maybe it's not all that new. Maybe it's just something you weren't expecting. Maybe other people see it all the time. You talk about it later. You'll post it online. All my players, they threw me in a pit and started shoveling dirt on top of me. Is that how we describe a bad game? Is that too much? Do you think? Anyway, so you're looking at 3-4 hours. We talked about setting up games for conventions yesterday, and we talked about making sure that the description was detailed enough that there weren't any real surprises when the players get to the table or the Discord room or the Twitch channel or whatever it is you're working with. The Zoom meeting. the Google Hangouts, the Skype channel. What does Skype do? I don't know. Anyway, so if you got your system, if you got any glaring house rules, things that should be known well in advance that might be deal breakers for people, rather than smaller things. We talked about how I allow people to swap out spells, take a certain amount of downtime, 10 minutes per spell level, and if they haven't used, say, a second level spell, they could take 20 minutes, change out one second level spell for another. You know, I just hate it when I'm running a game and it turns out the player just happened not to take a knock spell, and yet ultimately turns out to be something that has just stalled an adventure. It's just slowed it down. I mean, yeah, you can usually take a bunch of axes or get some stone working tools and cut your way through within a year around a magically locked door, but I think it's important to understand during convention games, there's often not just a clock externally, a time slot, but a clock within the game, some sort of factor, and this is something definitely to build into games. Unless you're doing a sandbox like I'm doing now for the Giants thing, if you're doing a one-shot adventure, you want people to enjoy it, put a clock on them. Make them feel some pressure to pace themselves a little more rapidly than they might at a home game table. Um, whether it's this has to be recovered for a ritual by the new moon, or um, this section of the underworld is being filled up with water because there was a breach and you're along an ocean seaside area, and just get something going that. And even if it doesn't happen, even if it doesn't wind up, even if they don't push it all the way to the end time, at least they know there's a clock ticking. It might not be a lot of pressure, but it's something. So they realize they need to stay on top of whatever it is they're doing, keep the mission moving forward. That's a huge part of it. When you're developing your adventure, when you're putting together the encounters, the NPCs, creatures, and I mentioned yesterday. So let's just back up 1 second and say, building adventures for conventions, use pre-gens. Don't. It's very rare that people will enjoy much of the time spent building characters to get to the adventure. Make sure you let people know they're going to be pre-gens. Give them some idea of what to expect. Don't spend a lot of time, ahead of game time, sorting that stuff out. Have them ready to go at the table or virtually for people to look over as soon as they arrive. Make that priority one, getting the characters sorted out. Give them a moment or two to look stuff over and know what they're going to do. And, this is part of building that adventure because you're creating it for that slot. So once you've gotten that, and understand that when you build those characters for a one-shot, they should have these things that they need. The spell list should include that knock spell out of the gate. Now, if they want to change stuff down the line, that's okay. And if you have a house rule in play where they can adjust it later, well, if they cross off knock and take a web or some other spell, and then during the course of the game they discover, oh, we should have kept the knock spell. Well, now they got to take 20 minutes. So there's eating up clock, eating up part of their time, slowing them down, making them sit around. Maybe you're using wandering monsters. I really don't suggest that for convention games. I think you should know all the stuff that can happen. Maybe you have a short list in case there's a period where there's going to be camping and they're in a hostile area. A short list of just a couple few things that should definitely have a chance of happening. Although I would say it probably doesn't hurt to just plan such a encounter. You know, if they camp out overnight, it's 100% sure that at some point a patrol is going to come across them because they're very vigilant, very diligent, and there's no way that even a cold camp will escape unnoticed. So it's just a matter of what time of night, and that creates that's not a that's not a railroad situation. These are creatures that are in their element. They are going to be watchful, and they're likely going to encounter anybody who sits in one location for too long. I don't know if you want to do that with the 20-minute adjustment, take it off the clock, but maybe we don't roll a wandering monster in a case like that. It's a little too rando. The overnight patrol thing. That's good to plan that out. During third edition, I created a lot of adventures that were specifically one shots for game days and for conventions. More so, I think, than I've done for just about anything else. And I've run first edition a lot longer and a lot more. And I've run second, and I've run OD&D, and I've run fifth. But a lot of stuff went down for third edition 3.5, where I was running stuff for game days quite often. And one of the things I found was if you're building an adventure for a one-shot type of situation, you want to, you're creating story elements, right? So you want a beginning, a middle, and an end. And not that you're going to railroad them through that, but you want those elements to be available in case they do follow a certain path, one that you do not force them on, but expect they probably will. Because if they pick up on a hook and you want to have probably a few hooks that are more or less about the same thing but come at it from different angles, if they do follow that mission through, you want the feeling of a story arc within your time slot to be for your game session at a convention. So by all means, have a big boss. Figure that's going to be your final encounter. Falling action, that should just be exposition. After the big encounter is over, let me just let everybody know. Here's what's going to happen. You've finished the quest, and you get back to town, and there's a big feast. However you want to fill it out, your treasure, your rewards, your names are written in the book of heroes. Whatever you're going to do, make that falling action an expository situation where it's just a few minutes. They've already had the big encounter. You're probably close on time anyway. As we know, you want to build an adventure, and when you run it, you want it to end 10 minutes before the hour so that they can get off to their other event, whatever is coming up next for them. And you probably have something too, whether you're playing in something else or running something else. So make sure that you cap it off, and you can stretch it out a little bit if you finish up a little early. You can embellish the expository, talk about what's at the feast, talk about the things in the treasure, maybe get some people to roll a few sets of dice so that the treasure is a little less rote, a little more flexible, something fun. Hey, Bob, good to see you. And that can sometimes be exciting at the end of a game for people to get a chance to roll some dice for whatever the treasure is. You know, if you got your magic item tables, it's meaningless if the adventure and the session is over. In 5 minutes, they're going to be packing their books up and their dice up and heading off to something else. But maybe you've done it as part of a series. Maybe you've got, maybe they're actually at the end of that session rolling dice for magic items that they've gotten that you're then going to give these characters and use them one level higher or at the same level for another adventure later in the day, as if it's the continuing adventures of. And that can be fun too. Um, if you have players that are returning or have bought into both slots, signed up for both slots, by all means, let them play the same characters. Let it mean something that they finished that first one. It gives a feeling of backstory, and this is something you can build into the adventures too. At the beginning of a later slot, you can say, well, after the victorious or after the abject failure of the adventurers to destroy the golem and get out of town before the mad scientist was able to chop us all up and use us for his next projects. So, you know, play with it. Have some fun with that too. Let it feel a lot more organic so that people say they don't like box text. They do like getting all the information though. So when you're creating an adventure, going back to a little more details of building the actual adventure piece by piece, go ahead and write box text. You don't have to read it, but if you have all the information that you definitely want to impart for each encounter or each phase of the adventure that you're creating, if you have all that in one nice paragraph chunk with all the bits and pieces, and you can highlight stuff or underline it or whatever, but if you have all that there, you can wing it later. But you'll know what all that stuff is. Some people like to do bullet points. I think that for most people, I would suggest you write it up as a chunk of narrative rather than bullet points. If you want to put bullet points in there as well, that's great. But I have found when I would rather have somebody reading something out and know that I'm getting all the information that I have, all the clues, all the details that I will need to solve the problem, to move forward, to survive the encounter. I want to know that I've got all that stuff. So I would rather have somebody who's not a great reader reading box text than have somebody who is not very good extemporaneously and is looking at bullet points and trying to awkwardly fit them into a narrative afterwards. If you're creating a narrative anyway, why not do it in advance? You know, just makes sense to go ahead and build it out that way in advance. If you want to go off script and not use that particular narrative later, if improvisation is wonderful, I don't advise doing it too often, but if some great idea hits you and you've been running games for a while and know how to work it into that adventure, you can build adventures on the fly to some degree and add it in. Don't be surprised if something that you thought was a great idea turns out to be a real dud in actual play, because that can That can happen, but that's okay. We live and we learn, and we get better at it. And once again, you're an adult playing games. Enjoy the hell out of it as long as you can for as much as you can. And I'll keep coming back to that advice. And I've always had that attitude about it, but I think we're finding in this wonderful year of a dearth of gaming for a lot of people that we've been pretty lucky, you know. Um, yeah, this is me just recognizing the privilege I've always had. Is that right? Um, I mean, I've always known how much I enjoyed gaming, and I've always known that I was lucky to be able to do it at all rather than to be struggling to survive. But when when the kind of stuff you, I don't want to say take for granted, but get used to doing is suddenly unavailable, yeah, I think you appreciate it more. And that feeds right back into when you're building the adventure. Build stuff into your adventures that you appreciate as a player when it's in there, whether it's little details. Um, Make sure that you don't let players overly obsess on little things. If you throw one little detail into a middle of an adventure that is monograms on a leather pouch that they find in a room with some coins in it, and it was just meant to be a bit of window dressing, um, and they find this, and you say, and there's an LT on the letter L and the letter T embroidered on the pouch. Well, be prepared for them to spend a half hour trying to figure out what the initials stand for and figure out if they should be going off somewhere and asking people, who's LT? Have you seen this pouch before? What should we know about it? Is this the big bad we're looking for? If this was just a random detail you threw in there just to give a little more depth to the adventure, that's fine, but make sure that they know this is just a little something. Oh no, the pouch is covered in dust and it's kind of beat up and it's been there a long, long time. There's no way it has anything to do with what you guys are looking for now, which is a certain person at this time. So make sure you're prepared to diffuse um, anything that you build in. By the same token, putting one thing in an adventure is going to make it stand out and make it seem like it's a clue or important information, even if it's not. But if you put 100 things in there, if you're very detailed oriented, you've got the opposite problem potentially happening. So you got to find a balance. You want to make sure that they don't ignore everything because they just assume, well, it's just so much detail in here. None of it really means anything. It's enjoyable and it's fun as part of the adventure, but we're not going to find any clues in there, or at least what's going to happen is the clues won't stand out. The information that they're supposed to, the details they're supposed to pick up on, that will help with them getting through the adventure, are going to be obscured because there's just way too much detail. Um, and I hate saying that because, God, I love a lot of good detail in something. The colors of banners and pennants that are flapping on the sides of a building as people enter a town and go to a tavern. Um, Things like that, and the details of the sigils that are on them. These kind of details, how dirty everything is. Um, is it cloudy? Is it low light because it's a storm's rolling in? All of these details really can set a mood, but you got to be careful they don't obscure the details that you need. there are ways of bringing people back around if they forget something. Let's say that pouch with the initials on it was actually something that was important to the figuring out who's the bad guy and who to go get, and let's say that was an actual important clue, but because there was so much in the room, it was an alchemist lab, and there's this and there's that, and there's a bookshelf, and there's a book that's called this and another one called that. And by the way, if you put a bookshelf in a room, be prepared for people to read every title. So build that into your adventure. Whether you just list 12 titles and that's all that's on the bookshelf, or you say, well, there's a whole section on animal husbandry, and there's a section on biology, and there's a section on this one stands out, and this one stands out, and then get a few titles out there if they're important. If they're not, express it in a way that doesn't sidetrack your adventure. As fun as bookshelves are, definitely avoid the situation where you have a library, because people will start reading this. People will start reading the titles off the spines of books, or if their titles aren't on the spine, they'll be pull them off the shelf and open up every one of them to see what's what. So find a way to diffuse that stuff when it goes off track. Better sooner than later, and better better blatantly, and being fully obvious that it is a yeah. We're gonna get to this one that we built a few weeks ago. Better to be obvious and move on with the adventure than to leave it in limbo and be struggling to get them off of this bad trail. All right. All that being the case, it's good to set up a handful of encounters, maybe having one or two encounters toward the center of what you're doing that can be ignored, that you can just cut out, so that you can truncate the adventure later on the fly when you need to, in case they get bogged down and stuff. One of the things about tournament adventures that I've always found, I went to my first Gen Con in 75, and when the AD&D Open started up, I would play every year in those. And one thing I discovered about those was there was always way more material than what was expected to be gotten through by most of the groups. Very few groups would complete, sometimes one, sometimes none, would complete a tournament module because there was so much there, and you were being scored on how they do at this encounter. Did they pick up to this? Did they pick up to that? So that nobody would go through an entire adventure like that and complete it in half the time slot or something like that. You want to make sure that there is enough adventure that you're building, that there's enough adventure to fill the time slot and beyond, with, I suggest, some pieces in the middle that you can just drop that are good and useful and maybe have some clues toward the thing, but aren't utterly necessary. So let's look at this map that we worked on, I don't know, a few weeks back. It's a Dyson Logos map. He put it out there. We went through and discussed it and put some labels on it based on what we thought was a likely scenario. We had an idea that this was a underground stream that was flowing this way. Notice the lip here, so this is a little higher. Where we got sandy beaches off on the left. Okay, this is going to be tricky because I know what I can do. Pardon me for just 1 second. We'll bring it up this way. We'll put it over this way. We'll full screen it. We're going to switch over to this other screen here. Here we go. And you should be able to see that I have a cursor in the upper left. I'm not going to make that really huge, but I'll wave it around a lot more. So, river flowing from right to left is what we decided when we were messing around with it before. We decided that this was an old underground cult temple that had long been in disuse, that had been taken over at some point as a bandits hideout, and then that fell by the wayside, and now there was just kind of random creatures here, but there are treasures to be had, and there are remnants from everything that came before. But in its original incarnation, you've got to assume that these rough areas, this center room toward the bottom, the center room toward the top, the hallways, and of course the cavernous passage through which the river flows, these are all natural features, right? So these were here, and then the rest of it that's built out was fashioned later. And one of the things we decided was, in its original use, when it was first built out as a cult sanctuary temple area, to the left-hand side, this pilgrim's foyer was where people would disembark to come and visit at the shrine, perhaps use it as an oracle. The double doors then, lower left, get into the pilgrim's prayers statuary, where we had 3 statues, and you could the base of each one could have a slot for putting money in, a chance to put some money in, ask a question, and maybe receive some sort of inspiration. We see the cursor. Okay, thanks, XL. Let's ask a question here. Let's see. Great Babe Texas says, let's say you were building a 3-4 hour module. What do you think is a good ratio of NPC encounters to traps, to puzzles, to battles per module? 3-4 hours. Well, that's highly system dependent, because in some game systems, encounters, even combat encounters, can go very quickly. In some systems, dealing with a trap, you just identify the fact that you're dealing with a trap and then roll a die, and it's either gone or it's still there. In first edition, which is what I primarily run, I could be describing a trap and you have to tell me in detail how you're dealing with it before I give you the roll to find and remove traps, right? Well, finding one, but before I allow you to remove it, you have to give me some sense of how you're approaching the removal. With a lock, you're looking inside the lock itself. You're checking around the door jamb for wires or other ways that it connects up. Maybe there's a tripwire that you found, so you're going to follow it toward an end and then try to tie it off on one side or the other. These are the kind of things that you would probably need to take the time to describe before you get a chance to remove the trap. So you can take longer in first edition with a trap encounter than in, say, third edition or fifth edition, where you're more or less, as soon as you know there's a trap, you can just say that you're disarming it in a lot of cases and make a roll. Um, so ratios are hard to pin down because they're very system dependent. However, I'm a big fan of having some sort of NPC stuff at the beginning. Whoever's providing the hooks, whoever is initiating the idea that there's an adventure to be had, um, whether it's a tavern keeper or a noble who's requesting your help, or um, perhaps you just run into somebody in town that is in distress, and the players initiate that contact, but you've already figured out as part of the adventure that this person is going to give them information that they're probably going to follow up on. So maybe this is hook 1, hook 2, hook 3 in these 3 different situations. And any one of them can be an NPC encounter. But once they get a hook and they start off in that adventure, even if you've written up and built for any one of these 3 to be used, once they've used one, brush the other ones aside. Don't waste a whole lot of time. Don't force them to have all 3 of these NPC encounters to then get to the adventure if they already know they're going on the adventure after the first one. So, as I said before, you want to build more than you can use. It's good to make sure that you have plenty enough material. So that all happens in town. That's NPC stuff. It's often useful to have your big bad, your villain, whatever, to be, if not human or if not a sentient race. I'm not sure that I've ever had a mindless slime or a to have the big encounter at the end be just this crazy huge hosts of skeletons, you know. So in a sense, you can connect a lot better with your players and they can engage a lot better with the adventure if your final encounter is also something in which they can interact in a role-playing manner. Now, it may be they got to see the big bad and somebody at the table is going to go, let's get him, and everybody's just going to charge, and there's going to be a big combat, and they're never even going to hear the wonderful speech that you've written up for the villain to taunt the player characters with. And that's fine. As long as they've enjoyed themselves, let it go. Don't marry yourself to your material or force it, or stop combat right in the middle and say, okay, well, here's what he was going to say, and then spout it out. You can always use it as a death speech. As he's dying, you hear him say, "Oh, I would have done this or that if you'd only, not for you meddling kids." So you can always throw congratulatory information into the falling action, that last 5 minutes, whatever. I'm keen on there being more combat than anything else for conventions and game days and such, as I'm sure everybody knows who's played any amount of time. It can be a wonderful thing to kick back and play in a home campaign, and you'll often hear somebody regaling everybody else with that great adventure we had where we never even picked up the dice. We were just sitting and talking the whole time, and there wasn't any combat. Well, what's the ratio of combat to role playing for those for those groups. Sure, they remember that one night they all sat around. But I've got to tell you, if people come to play a game that involves dice at a convention or a game day and they are not, in fact, rolling dice at any point, um, probably most of the people that are playing are going to find that, or are going to at least find that odd, um, if not become dissatisfied with how that adventure, how that slot, how that event went for them. So, certainly at the table, at the time, and be sure you're making sure that everybody is on the same page with this. If it goes that route, where it becomes that non dice rolling event, let that happen organically. But don't force it, and don't let one player drag it toward that when you've got 4 or 5 other players there, and they've taken out their dice and they put them on the table. And there's a clue for you. Put encounters in that require some dice rolling, and sure, maybe some tricks and traps, maybe some skill checks, some climbing, some swimming. We've got a river in this map here. One of the things we decided with this map here, by the way, was that this main temple over here was going to include some race and some whites in the former priest quarters, and that there would be shadows out in the gathering platform from back in the day, that there would be some ghouls perhaps, or and this all depends on what level you're striving for. But if you've got if you're setting up, say, a 5th to 7th level adventure, this suits it pretty well. Guards quarters, pilgrims processing. So the original intent was, when this was built, pilgrims would get off here at the pilgrims foyer, they would make their offering, they would follow through, maybe not, maybe that's all they came to do and they leave. But if they're going to stick around for more worship, they'd go up the stairway, they'd go into here, there'd be like a processing center, they'd be sent across where they would gather in the outside where the platform is. Here is where most of the proselytizing or ritual activity would take place, up on the platform with the adherents down below. There is an altar in here, but it would be very rare for anybody to get back in there, into the temple proper. But there you go. I mean, this covers the whole thing. And if you set this up with down the line, as if it was years later and it was no longer active, but we've got wraiths and whites, we've got shadows, we've got some lower level undead in here. Maybe we've got some traps here because they've set up traps in the lower left at the statuary, because back in the day they didn't want some pilgrim coming in and stealing money from previous pilgrims from the coffers underneath the statues. So some traps might have been set in there, and they still exist. Of course, the river, you've got some ability score activities. Just bringing the boat in. You could make it a very swift river, make that a challenge in and of itself. Is it possible there's some rapids in here? Maybe boats can capsize. Maybe there need to be some swim checks. Certainly making the boat function properly. Not everybody is good with a boat. So, maybe some skill checks along those lines, or ability score checks, depending on how you're doing it. We can have this area kind of open, this cargo loading, and just have some old supplies in here. Not every room needs to have encounters. It's good to have some number of rooms that are there where you can put an encounter in if you need one, because everything's happening too fast, and they're just the best group. They're just the best group that ever existed, and they're just going through everything very quickly. Let's see. let me go back to here. All right, there we go. Anyway, I think we're about at the time. There's going to be some people that have an 11 o'clock, so I want to make sure I finish this up. Hopefully, you've gained some insights about running convention games and building adventures for that purpose. Um, I think once again, I'd like to state that above all else, be sure you're having fun. Make sure you're enjoying yourself. When you do, that's infectious. It's more likely that your players will also have a good time. If you're having a good time and enjoying yourself, let the small stuff slide off your back. Don't get bogged down in minutia or frustration. Keep things flowing and keep things enjoyable, and build the adventure with that in mind. So that's the best advice I can give. Hey, I want to thank everybody for coming out today. I appreciate that. I appreciate very much if you get a chance to follow the channel. And if you chime in on the stream chat while you're here, we do a little giveaway each week. Nothing involved in that. You don't have to do anything more than be a follower of the channel and chime in the stream chat. And that just makes sure that we know you're not a bot. So we'll throw you up on a list, and we keep that list. And then once a week, usually on Monday, we identify somebody who's been there from the previous week, and we do some sort of giveaway. For the last 20 weeks, we've been doing giveaways of Game Hole Con badges. Well, that's off now, so we got to find something else around here to give away. I think I might have an old DVD or two to pass along. So we'll see what we got. Anyhow, thank you very much. I am going to say, we got a basset hound in the neighborhood every now and he gets a little rambunctious. Thanks for coming out today. Building Adventures on Friday here. Come on out, 10 a.m. each and every day. We do GM reviews on Saturday, rules retrospective on Sunday, weekly news and announcements on Monday, cartography and world building on Tuesday, campaign discussion on Wednesday, GMing tips on Thursday, back around the horn next Friday for more Building of Adventures. If you're catching up on this show on YouTube, which we upload right after we get done here, thank you very much. Please subscribe to the channel. Give us a thumbs up on whatever videos you're watching, and if you have some constructive criticism, by all means, give it to us. We appreciate it. Anything we can do to make the show better is always a good thing. This has been the OK Grognard Show from beautiful Lake Geneva, Wisconsin. Bye-bye.